Good evening, everyone. My name is Malcolm Merriweather, and I am the ninth music director of the Dessoff Choirs. We're really excited to welcome you to this Dessoff Dialogue, which is an opportunity for you to ask questions and to learn about some of our upcoming events. This dialogue is dedicated to learning and exploring an incredible piece that we will perform on November 6th at 4 p.m. The piece is called Considering Matthew Shepard. We will join together with the Dessoff Orchestra and soloists and of course the choir with me conducting at the New York Society for Ethical Culture. You can get your tickets for that event on dessoff.org. You can click on the events page and purchase tickets there. We are super excited to be performing live in person again. We've been rehearsing since September on the Upper East Side, and it has been magical to rejoin together after meeting on Zoom and meeting virtually for many, many months. And we're also excited to resume the plans to perform this work. We had been slated to do the New York City premiere of Considering Matthew Shepard in April 2020. Of course, that concert had to be canceled. So welcome this evening. If you're coming from New York City, I know we have people coming from around the country. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you have questions, feel free to type those questions in the Q&A, and we will get to those as we can throughout the show. I am so excited to welcome three incredible guests. In addition to working with the choir this fall, I've had the opportunity to collaborate with two directors for this production. And I would like to start by introducing one of our co-directors, Rod Caspers. For many years, Rod Caspers served as the executive director of university events at the University of Texas at Austin, creating and producing special events. Prior to that, he served as the executive director of creative services for the UT system, where he and colleagues received 5 Lone Star Emmy Awards for creating and producing the PBS series State of Tomorrow. He has taught and directed at the University of Wisconsin and the University of Texas at Austin. Rod staged the original production of Conspirare, Considering Matthew Shepard. Welcome, Rod.
It's very nice to be here. Thanks. I'm excited to be a part of this tonight and very excited to resume rehearsals next week.
Great. Our other co-director, now Rod is coming to us from Texas. Elliott is a little bit closer. So Elliott Forrest is a Peabody Award-winning broadcaster, director, designer, and producer, co-director and projection designer of the live national tour and PBS TV special of Considering Matthew Shepard by composer Craig Hella Johnson. Elliott has a lot of history with this piece. Executive producer of the Public Theater's 2020 Shakespeare in the Park and On the Radio of Richard II. Co-creator and producer of the national tour of An Evening with Itzhak Perlman. He is also the afternoon host on New York's classical radio station WQXR. He has a ton of other accolades. Welcome, Elliott.
Turn on my mic. Great to see you. All of us, this has really been a great project for years with Rod, but working with you here in New York, we are so thrilled to bring this work to New York for the very first time.
Yes, amen, amen. And last but not least, we welcome Cathy Renna, who works with the National LGBTQ Task Force as communications director. But she is no stranger to that organization and that incredible staff and has a history with them. Renna is a veteran in the communications industry. Cathy has executed her particular expertise in crisis and strategic communications, playing a central role in shaping nearly all major issues affecting the LGBTQ community, from the beating death of Matthew Shepard in 1998 to the fight for marriage equality and the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. She most recently worked with the team that coordinated the historic coverage for World Pride Stonewall 50, working with New York City Pride. Welcome, Cathy.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. Elliott, Rod, good to see you.
Great to see you.
So you all know each other, right?
We do.
Yes, yes. And like I said earlier, I've appreciated all of our conversations, especially more recently with Rod and Elliott about their experience with the piece, and we'll dive into that a little bit later. But first, I wanted to just share with our listeners, because I realized at Brooklyn College when I was working on this piece with our Brooklyn College students, that not everyone is familiar with this story. If you were born after 1998, I remember in 1998 I was in middle school, so and I remember the name Matthew Shepard, but I think that people with children during that time, or people depending on what stage you are in your life, have a different recollection. So Cathy, I was wondering if you could start off by just giving us an account of what happened in 1998 to Matthew Shepard.
Sure, I'd like to. And I really appreciate your giving us the opportunity to sort of tell the story, because I do this a lot. I particularly do it a lot in October. And now when I do talkbacks with, whether it's a choir doing Considering Matthew Shepard, or it's a high school or a college or a community theater or a professional theater doing the Laramie Project, I've stopped asking where people were when Matthew Shepard was killed, because some of them weren't even born yet. So it's amazing to me that this story has, continues to make a difference, continues to, have this legacy, but it's over 20 years now. It was a long time ago. So basically, to sort of encapsulate it, in October of 1998, October 6th to be exact, I was actually living in Washington, D.C., and working for GLAAD, the LGBT Media Advocacy Organization. The internet and email, these were all fairly new things to us. Cell phones were like super big. And over the course of that afternoon, we started hearing reports of a young man who had been found beaten and left for dead, and in Wyoming, in a town called Laramie, Wyoming, which I had to look up that afternoon, and that there was suspicion that it was motivated by the fact that he was gay. So over the course of that day, we started to see more and more reports coming in. By the evening, I remember, I'll never forget, I was standing in my apartment, like in my pajamas, and I was on the phone with Jim Osborne. Jim was the president of the LGBT student group at the time at the University of Wyoming. Matt was a member, Matt was a friend. And I said to Jim, what can I do to help? And Jim said, I am literally sitting underneath my desk at the student union, and I need you to get on a effing plane, because we are bombarded with media, and his friends, the community, were really struggling with how to deal with all this. I mean, it happened so fast. I was on a plane the next day to Laramie, and I got off the plane, and the first thing I went to was a vigil for Matt, who was at that point in the hospital in Fort Collins in critical condition. And there were about 1,000 people at the Newman Center, which is the Catholic center on campus at the UW. I was there through the time where we, were holding out to see, whether Matt would survive or not. In the middle of the night, on October 12th, well, early morning, October 12th, I guess, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a knock on my hotel room door telling me that Matt had passed. And that morning, I participated and moderated in the largest press conference I have ever seen in my entire life, and probably ever will. And so it went all over the world. This was a story that was covered worldwide. I also, obviously worked with media through that year, and then about almost exactly a year later, actually, was the first trial of one of the perpetrators, Russell Henderson. He decided to change his plea. He pled guilty. I also sat through the second trial of Aaron McKinney. They were both found guilty and given 2 consecutive life sentences. They're both still in jail. But I have since worked with both the Shepard family and the foundation, but also with media, and also with so many of the things that have come out of Matt's murder. For example, the Laramie Project, but also considering Matthew Shepard. And so, you can certainly Google a tremendous amount of coverage and history of all this, but in a nutshell, essentially, this was a historic watershed moment in LGBTQ history, as we celebrate LGBTQ History Month this month. And also, he did die the day after National Coming Out Day. So, there's so much attention being paid to the community at the time. I also want to make sure we recognize that today is the 12th anniversary of the passage of the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd hate crimes legislation. It came up on my Facebook this morning with pictures of us at the White House, where we were at the signing with President Obama and the Shepards and the sisters of James Byrd. James Byrd, you may also remember, in 1998, June of that year, before Matt was killed, was an African-American man who was killed in a brutal, horrifying hate crime in Jasper, Texas. So that's sort of the capsule version of what happened.
Thank you, and thank you for commemorating the anniversary of the passage of that very important bill. It's I don't think it's on purpose or a coincidence, rather, that we're speaking on this subject this evening. So thank you for sharing that with us. So to me, it sounds like this this horrible lynching really changed the way sort of hate crimes are viewed in the media. And do you think that, was there any other event like this before Matthew Shepard, Cathy?
There were, but they just did not garner the same amount of attention. I mean, I think the challenge that I have faced throughout my career as an activist is that, we grapple with the question. I don't think I've ever done anything like these kinds of conversations or a talk back after the Laramie Project or considering Matthew Shepard, or an interview for that matter, where someone has, not asked me, why did Matt's murder get so much attention? Excuse me. In fact, truth is, the day that I met his mother, it was one of the first questions she asked me, because she was doing her homework, and Judy said to me, and I had not met Judy Shepard up until that point. It was months after it happened, because they asked for their privacy and we gave it to them. And she said, the more I learn about this, the more I realize this happens all the time. Why did my son's murder get so much attention? And so I'm sure this is something we'll probably talk about later as well, in terms of the legacy that, that Matt's murder has created. But, I have to say, we were living in a time where there was we were really on a upward slope in terms of visibility. Ellen came out in 1997. We were dealing with a battle of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the beginnings of the marriage equality. And, there was a lot going on in the community in the late 90s. But the truth is, even though this happened so frequently, a lot of it was because the community mobilized. The community rallied around this young man who was white and college student and, economically privileged in an upper middle class family. As I always say, he was gay, but he wasn't too gay. And there's so many different elements of this that speak to, how our own community needs to be part of the process to really amplify these stories. And so, that's the short answer to the question of, why did this murder get so much attention? I mean, I have a full hour lecture version I could do as well, but I did a TED talk actually on this very topic. But that's it. To me, that is the question that we continue to ask ourselves. And, here we are over 20 years later, and we have certainly made a tremendous amount of progress. But the reality is that we are still, as a community, under attack. And in fact, the part of our community that is most under attack for hate crimes are trans women of color. Mm-hmm. And that is, in New York City. It's not, these things don't just happen in Wyoming. They don't happen just in, rural areas that you might not know about. They happen in big cities. They happen to all kinds of folks in the community. And they happen with alarming frequency that we don't always talk about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I wish we could dive into the nuances of, of how Matt's story was amplified and how the others in the LGBT community, how the differences would have played out in a different manner. But I do want to shift a little bit and talk to our directors. And I know, Cathy, you've been involved with the piece and know Dennis and Judy Shepard. And I know that both of our co-directors also have worked closely with the family. So I wanted to, just start off with Elliott and Rod and ask you about your experience of collaborating on this artistic endeavor of this oratorio, but also getting to know the family.
Maybe actually you should start, Rod, because Rod was the first director for the first workshop, and then he called me in 2016, and that's when I jumped on board. But so start with the beginning, Rod. You begin that.
Sure. So I got a call from Craig Hella Johnson, and he said one night, I've written something, Rod, and I'd like you to just come and listen to it, or would you come and listen to it? Because I think it might need some staging. And Craig and I, just by chance, had been junior faculty members together at the University of Texas years before, and our paths had crossed, and we'd always stayed in touch. But this was really a call kind of out of the blue. So I think a week later, I showed up at his studio. He sat at the piano. I sat on a bench by the side, and I'm getting emotional right now. It was, he played the entire thing and sang it by himself. And it was just like, oh my God, I don't, yes, this should be staged. Yes, when can this be done? He was still unsure of whether it was ready, what it needed, all sorts of things. So I was fortunate enough to get to do the first, it was sort of a workshop production of it. And we did it in really very little time. The singer stood on risers. It was just, we were just exploring, but it went over in a huge way. It really impacted the audience. And shortly thereafter, PBS decided they wanted to do something with the piece, and I was committed to another project. So I got a hold of Elliott because we'd gone to school together and done some work together, and I thought he'd be the perfect person for this. And Elliott, I'll let you jump in at that point.
Well, I remember exactly where I was when you called and said, there's this piece, it's about Matthew Shepard, and it's a musical version, it's an oratorio, and, would I be up for directing it for PBS? And it was like, I said yes before I even heard it. I mean, part of it was the opportunity to work with my friend Rod, and also the legacy of Matthew Shepard, which I knew well. I'd probably seen 5 productions of the Laramie Project. For people who don't know, it's Moises Kaufman's Tectonic Theater Company created this work over 20 years ago, and I think to this day is, if not one of, it's the most performed play in high schools and colleges. And my son was in a production in their high school, and he played Phelps. He played the bad guy, and the Westboro Baptist Church, as a sidebar, had a practice of going to productions and boycotting them and trying to stop these productions, including my son's production. And so they were all interviewed in real world that the Westboro Baptist Church was going to come and protest this production. And maybe it was divine intervention, which I'm not sure I believe in, but the Westboro Baptist Church car broke down and they never made it. So we all had a laugh at their expense. But I jumped in and worked with Rod, and I had a similar emotional experience with Craig too, because I listened to it. They videotaped the workshop that Rod talked about, and I watched it. And so I flew down to Austin, and I sat with Craig, the composer, and we went through every movement, and he talked through every single line and movement of the piece, so I could ask what his intention was, what's happening here, what's going on in the story, where did the musical references come from. And again, it was an incredibly emotional experience. And then, I mean, it's a bit of a long story because it's been 3 years, but we did it for television. We went on tour. We did Ravinia. Cathy joined us and helped not only spread the word about it, but joined us for talkbacks. Rod was involved as well. And so we were all doing, I think we did some 20 different performances, maybe, including in Laramie. We took the show literally to the scene of the crime. And was also very emotional because Cathy talks about Jim Osborne. You know, if people know the story that there was this protest of the Westboro Baptist Church, and the Friends decided to create these big wings, these big angel wings, out of sheets and PCP pipe and all this stuff, and Jim was one of the guys, and the sheriff who prosecuted the case came to our show. So here we are doing a show, and the real life people that it's about were there, including the Shepards. You know, Judy and Dennis came. So this real life story, this incredibly emotional story, this landmark case turned into this incredibly beautiful work. And it's really hard to talk about music, but if people have not heard it, the music is spectacular. The music is amazingly beautiful for a story that's so tragic. So I'll just stop there and see what else you want to know.
That was fantastic. Thank you, both of you. And I think a natural direction to go in is really to talk a little bit about the oratorio as a genre, and look at, you know, favorites within the genre, like Elijah and Handel's Messiah. These huge choral works for choir and orchestra and soloists that tell stories from the Bible. And now we have a contemporary oratorio with Matthew Shepard as the subject. And Rod and Elliott have really sort of turned it into a sort of interdisciplinary, comprehensive, you know, there are lots of different elements in this oratorio. So what you're going to hear is you're going to, of course, hear the Dessoff Choir singing beautifully. You're also going to hear fabulous soloists. Matthew Cahill will play the role of Matthew Shepard. Tammy Petty will sing the soprano solos, and Markel Reed will sing the bass solos. And you'll hear a band on stage, which will consist of a violin, a cello, a clarinet, percussion with a marimba, and an electric guitar, things you don't normally hear with the Dessoff choirs. So, and Craig Hella Johnson is, you know, I've admired Craig for most of my adult life when I sort of entered the field of choral music, because he just sets the standard with his leadership and direction of Conspirare. And he is also an incredible composer with his original content and also his nods. You're going to hear nods to Benjamin Britten and various other composers throughout the piece that are threaded throughout the piece. Of course, Bach as well, and even some German. But I think that there's another element that I want Elliott to talk about, and that's the projections, because I think that normally when people go to hear an oratorio like Handel's Messiah, they sort of sit there and they listen and they know it really well. So Elliott, tell us about the projections that you've created and what they will bring to the audience. You're muted, Elliott.
Classic mistake. There you go. It's the projections were an element from the very beginning that I thought might add to both the television production, which people can see for free online. It's produced by KLRU in Austin, and then we've done it in all the productions ever since, and we've continued to. They've morphed and changed and added, but one of the things we thought about was that people might be able to see Matthew himself. So this is just one of the projections that's up. This is the, young man in the prime of his life before he was cut down. We also use the projections for landscapes because you get to see the terrain of Wyoming. You get to see the fence itself. Also, we were given, for the lack of a better word, assets from the family. And there's a song about all the things that Matthew loves. He loves Jeopardy in Europe and Feeling Good and pasta. And this is really from his journal. The family gave us pictures from his journal, and we were able to do that. So those are projected on a big screen as well. In addition, and this is every choir, is that if you get 10, 15, 30, or in the case of Dessoff, 40 people on stage singing, even in English all together, you're kind of not going to know what they're singing about. And that's not always the case, but it's sometimes the case. So we use the projections also for a version of super titles. And also there'll be a libretto in the program so people can follow along if they miss it, because it's beautiful words in addition to beautiful music. So the projections are used, again, for somewhat super titles. You'll see words, you'll see text, you'll see actual pictures, you'll see the criminals. You'll see the two guys who did the murder, and all. So it sets a stage for character and context, and some reality.
Mm-hmm. And you're right, Elliott. The oratorio is incredibly rich with its text, drawing from many different sources, from poetry, from as you just shared with us, actual quotations from Matt's journal. And that, for me, I think we've all kind of shared the moment where we sort of broke down. For both of you, it was maybe when you first heard the oratorio in the presence of the composer. But for me, Elliott and I were having a meeting. I don't know if Rod was there. I think it was just Elliott and I. And Elliott, you shared the projections with me for the first time, and you came to the slide with Matthew's handwriting, and it took the wind out of me. It just to see this young man's writing about himself was so beautiful, and to think about what was done to him. So I'm really proud of the choir, because typically we stand on risers and we sing, and we go home afterwards. This is going to be like you've never seen the Dessoff choirs. Elliott and Rod we've been working over the past couple of weeks really diligently, and they're doing some staging, and Dessoff is actually going to be moving around on stage, and I just can't believe that.
I would just like to say, after we started to work with you and the choir and started to stage it, Rod and I were together, and I'd go up to individuals and go, "You guys are good with this, right?" I was really checking in with them to make sure that they were going, "No, we just wanted to stand and sing this." And it's like, "No, we're moving you around." And they're like, some of them all on their own, "I have a degree in theater. I love this. I'm so glad we're doing this." And so everyone's been really game, and I just want to thank you and the choir for that.
Oh, you're welcome. So Rod, did you want to say something?
Yeah, it kind of ties together with several things that have been said. First of all, it is in the oratorio form, but it's so accessible because Craig Hella Johnson has used has drawn from all these genres of music. So there's literally something for everybody if you listen to music at all. There's a piece that's borders on country. There's a blues song in it. There's a couple songs in it that sound like they kind of come from Broadway. Some of the music sounds very religious in nature, but it all comes together because it's really, while it's all about Matthew Shepard, it's really a story about all of us. And that's really what the composer is asking us to look at, is kind of what's our role, not only in this story, but taking this story forward and doing our part to maybe not having happen again. So it's just, there will be a place for everybody to get into. And that's what I think the staging does as well.
And can I add to that in this idea, Craig has said this every time he's ever talked about it, and if he was on this call, he would say this as well, is that his intent was to tell the story of this horrible thing and then ask, is love possible? Is love still possible among all of us, even among so much hate? And it seems to me, in such a divided country right now, that question is still valid more than 20 years later. And the answer is yes, we can still find love among all of us, and we can find a way to get together is still the answer. And that's sort of the heart of what drove him to write this. Just to address your oratorio question, we discussed the idea of a full Passion piece. And in the tradition of the Passion, it would end with Matthew's death, with Jesus's death. But there's an epilogue. And the epilogue he decided to make so much more positive. And the answer would be yes, love can be found even among so much hate.
Fantastic. So Rod, you have been with this piece from the beginning, and both of you have had different experiences with different choirs around the country. So I think it would be interesting for everyone who is listening tonight to sort of talk about the different utterances of the piece and sort of what they're going to get with Dessoff, because I think what we're doing is unique and it's in this way as well.
Sure. Most of the time that I've staged this has been with Conspirare, but we have done other productions, and we've done a production that was all with college students at LSU, which was very different because suddenly everybody on stage singing was pretty much the exact age that Matthew was when he was murdered. So that was very interesting. We've also, sometimes there's a chorus where people in the audience join in, and we've used, like in several places, a large number of high school students, and that's given it a very different texture. The thing I love about this production, and I wish I could have been at every rehearsal from the beginning, but this is, I'm actually sensing and seeing a community of singers coming together, because you've got the Dessoff Choir, we've got some wonderful singers from Brooklyn College, then we've got these soloists coming in, and the piece is so much about a community response to a tragic situation and where we as a group of people take that. So it's been really neat to see all these different people coming together, being thrown into this staging, and how the community that's being built is performing this piece about community. So I think it's going to be very exciting. Elliott, you might want to talk about this too, but this is the first time we've had one person sing Matt all the way through. In other productions, it's been sung by 2 or 3 different people, and there's a device in the piece that allows you to understand what's going on. But I'm excited to really see how it feels and sounds and how the audience reacts when we have a single Matthew playing Matthew all the way through. The projections have changed a little. It's going to be very, very rich. So I really look forward to it.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add about that is that it seems like there's a dial between choir concert, theater piece, and we're constantly sort of like making adjustments in that, and having more than one person sing Matt was sort of in the choir part, and it's like dialing it over to the theater piece. He said, no, we want one person, one actor, one singer to play this role. and it changes things. And we're finding out what that is because we've never done it that way before.
Terrific.
Yeah,
Cathy?
I just wanted to add something to what Rod was saying. I mean, I've had the pleasure of seeing it performed by Conspirare. I had the pleasure of seeing it performed short pieces during the service at the National Cathedral where Matthew was interred after 20 years. Finally, he's actually buried with Helen Keller at the Washington National Cathedral. I was on the anniversary of the 20th anniversary of his death. But I think that I worked with a production actually here in New Jersey, Montclair State University, and it was college students. And I think it's especially moving, as Rod was saying. But what I find so fascinating about this is that it's such a transformative experience for the singers, because they know that this is not a fictional story, in the way actors who are in the Laramie Project know that they actually have the responsibility of saying the words of real people, whether they like those words or not, because there's certainly plenty in there, like Fred Phelps, that is hard to hear. But it was so transformative for these young people and for everyone that I've talked to that's ever participated in this, because it is about a real person. I mean, this is the first piece about Matt that has ever really been created. And the fact that it's been done with not just the cooperation, but the love and joy and celebration of his family. I was at that performance in Laramie, and Jim Osborne and Dennis and Rulon Stacy, who was the CEO of the hospital where Matt was when he died in Fort Collins, Dave O'Malley, who was a detective on the case, who then became the sheriff of Albany County. I mean, they were just so moved. And I think for all of us, what Craig has done is create an opportunity to celebrate Matt, and not just dwell on the way he died, but on the way he lived. And I think that's so important. And that's why at the end, the answer is yes. The answer is yes. There is love and there is hope, and that we can do what we have to do to try to make sure that these things don't happen again.
I agree. Thank you so much. And, all of this talk about community and all of these different forces come together. I think it's time to listen to a clip from the show. And actually, this clip was this sound clip, which I'm going to share now, was created by a singer who sang this piece and really was so moved by the experience that he wanted to share something. So this is, I'm going to bring it up on my screen. And Rod, if you would, share where this excerpt comes from in the oratorio while I get this up. Thank you.
So at the very beginning, we're introduced to the locale of this story and the importance of the natural world and how the nature that surrounds us impacts us. And then the second movement, you meet Matt alive, the young man, vibrant. We meet his family. It's a really beautiful, rich, upbeat moment in the story. And then the third movement, which we're about to hear a little bit from, the tone changes a little bit, and it's a song about the importance of telling stories and why we tell stories in an attempt to understand our lives. And we have to go back and retell those stories to continually look at what our life is about. The incredible thing about this song, and then I'm going to shut up and just have you listen, is by the end of the song, the composer almost asks us to commit to facing this story so that we can understand not only the story, but our lives better as well. So it's a beautiful, short movement here. I think that's probably enough.
each other's stories so that we will remember, trying to find the meaning. I am open to hear this story.
Ooh, that is one of my favorite moments in the piece, just that tension there and that release.
Can I just say parenthetically, I know that video, it was made by Matt Alber, and Matt was the very first person to play Matt, and in addition, he was the person that walked up to Craig on the day of the beating and said, hey, there's this story about this young man who was beaten and put onto a fence. And I mean, and this is in a way where it all started. And I also find it sort of just coincidental that our Matt is named Matt too. So there's just, I just wanted to share that.
Oh, thank you so much. And the soloist was Stephanie Moore, beautiful soprano. So thank you, Stephanie, for your gifts. And even though I hope I can meet Stephanie someday, but even though I can't see her, she just illustrates these words so beautifully in this rendition. And you'll hear Tammy Petty bring these solos to New York for the first time, and we've got some great soloists because we're really asking them to sing, like Rod said, country, blues, classically, musical theater. There are a lot of different styles and a lot of different textures that combine to really make this, I think, a meaningful experience. So as we sort of wrap things up here this evening, I'm wondering if our directors, if there are any moments in the show, in the piece, that really stick out to you. And you've illuminated so much for me throughout this creative process. And I think I've shared some things that maybe you've not noticed in the actual printed score that has, I think, probably evolved over the many years of this piece. But I'm wondering if there are any moments that the audience should look out for when they get their tickets to see this New York premiere.
Well, just a couple things. I mean, there's many things, but just a couple things. Craig borrowed from all sorts of different places and people when he wrote this libretto. And I think 3 or 4 of the pieces come from a poetry book by Leslie Newman. And in her poems, the fence is personified. So you hear from the fence that held Matthew, that Matthew was tied to or rested on or whatever. And it's stunning to hear what the fence felt. I can't put it any other way. So there's that, and I think it's when I really stop to watch and listen and understand that, it becomes, we all become a fence, if you will, holding Matthew, and what that means and what our responsibility is to our fellow humans and so forth. So there's that. The other thing I would just mention is, and I alluded to it earlier, this is a piece about Matthew and his family and the characters, but really every singer is a character in this piece, and everyone who's in the audience listening is a character. And Craig really asks us to go on individual journeys as we listen to this, because he really wants us to, you know, walk through the fire and come out in a different place. And yes, love can happen. Love can surround us, even through this darkness. So I think that's important, that we're all going to go on a journey as we watch or sing this.
I would point out a couple of things. In addition to that, yes, the fence sings. That makes things, people should understand that. That there's some really harsh language in 1 or 2 spots, that it's shocking in a way, I believe. I think some audiences will be shocked by the frankness of both the brutality of what happened and the brutality of what people say. There's only a couple, but I just wanted to mention that. Mary in the chat section here asked about one of the most interesting pieces in the work, I Am Like You. It would have been very easy for the composer to write the 2 men who beat Matthew Shepard as complete villains. But he asked a slightly different question, which is, how have we raised men that people would be capable of that? And how am I like you, Aaron and Russell? He asked the question. And when we do talkbacks, that particular section, as short as it is, gets some of the most interesting responses, particularly from high school students, because it asks them, what are you capable of? Who are you capable of hurting? And I think that's really interesting to see that. And just in a personal note, we talked about there's a blues number and a country number. There's just one out that just could be on the radio right now, The Innocents. And it is just a beautiful song, and it just asks, where, oh, where has the innocence gone? And I can't tell you how many tears I've shed both listening to that. You too, Cathy. Just, and in general, how many tears I've shed for a young man I never met. And that's what's brought this out, because it really is about all of us.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's one of the, I think it's the first thing I say when I did that TEDx talk. I say, you know, I never met Matthew Shepard, but Matthew Shepard has had an extraordinary impact on my life. I think we can all say that now. I think the world can say that now. And I think that's the thing where you talk about going on a journey, right? It's a personal journey, and it's one where, you know, you do hear some very difficult, hateful language, actually, in some ways, and painful language. But what it is it's real, you know. And I think that's the whole point of this piece, is that it's all real. I put the link in the chat for Leslie's book, October Morning, because those poems were so powerful. And what folks may or may not know is that she was the National Coming Out Day speaker at the university a week after Matt passed. And they called her, Jim Osborne called her, and said, I understand if you want to cancel, because there was, you know, fear in her heart about going to this place where this young man had just been killed. And she decided to go anyway, and forged a bond with folks there in the same way that so many of us have. I mean, I think, you know, that's the interesting thing. He has changed all of our lives forever. Jim Osborne, who was one of the angels in Angel Action, which you can you can Google and look up. Their response to Fred Phelps was one of love and grace. And it ended a legacy of our community just being angry with this horrible person who would come and protest at the funerals of people who died of AIDS, or people who are victims of hate crimes, or, it was just anything LGBTQ focused, they would show up at to protest. And turning this around and looking at it with grace and with love is what's going to change somebody. And I think especially for young people, as Elliott was saying, I mean, all the young people that I've worked with who've done work, whether it's considering Matthew Shepard or anything else related, it makes them think and wonder about the culture that they live in, and where, yes, this is obviously an extremely violent act that happened to a young man because of who he was. But we think about those little things, the name calling in the hallway, the offhand comments that, you might make when you see someone walk by, the things you hear at Thanksgiving dinner with your family, and no one steps up and says, that's not okay. Like, those are the small things that then add up in our lives, right? And this is an opportunity to confront them in a way that has just, it's almost impossible to describe what the experience is like. When I invited folks, when my wife saw Considering Matthew Shepard for the first time, she had heard some of the music, but she didn't know what to expect. And she walked away from this really a changed person. And to me, that's the unbelievable power of this piece, because it does bring together Leslie as poetry, it brings together Matt, and it also, is something that Craig is a genius and put together in a way that manages to touch people, some 20 years later. I mean, this is a fairly recently released piece of music. One would think, about something that happened 20 years ago, or well, less than 20 years ago in this case, but it's still having that impact. Why is that? We should think about why that is. And it's all in there if you see the show.
And also, as Mary Delk, I love your comment. She encourages the readers to read the libretto before the show.
Yes.
It will be available in the program, so you can take it home with you. But it's something that I've really immersed myself in over the past several weeks as I've been preparing for rehearsals. And I think that this is a great way to sort of round out our discussion, because this, as we've shared, there's going to be sort of a psycho-emotional impact that's going to happen that through this journey. It is sort of indescribable, especially being a performer. So I want to invite everyone to tell all your friends to join us for this production. We're putting a lot of work into it, and Rod is flying from Texas to be with us. He's already come once to work with the choir, and we have incredible soloists, and we want to share this story with you. Also, I will add that this entire concert will be in memory of Erica Rohrbach, who was a member of the Dessoff choirs for over 20 years, and who loved poetry and loved literature and all things English. She did our programs and edited our programs for many years, but also was so excited to do this piece and really championed this piece for the Dessoff choirs. And unfortunately, she passed away last December. So this concert will be in her memory, but her partner, Mel, will be in attendance along with her mother, Mary. So this concert will have come from many different directions for Dessoff. Not only the subject of Matthew Shepard, but also in memory of our dear Erica. So tickets are available at dessoff.org. They won't be sold at the door, so please get your tickets in advance of the concert. And it is November 6th at 4 p.m., New York Society of Ethical Culture. Thank you, Elliott. Thank you, Cathy. Thank you, Rod. You're all brilliant. And I have learned so much from you, and I am deeply indebted to your collaboration on this project. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great fun working
Thank
with
you.
you. Yeah, buy
Hey.
tickets. Buy tickets. Come see the show.
I'll see everyone on November 6th. Bye-bye.